limit as x goes to 1 of x minus 1 divided by the square root of 4x squared plus 5x minus the square root of 11x minus 2. The first thing we're going to do is try plugging in a 1 for each of the x's. In the numerator, that'll give us 1 minus 1. In the denominator, that'll give us the square root of 4 times 1 squared plus 5 times 1 minus the square root of 11 times 1 minus 2, which will be 1 minus 1 divided by 4 times 1 squared is 4, plus 5 times 1, which is 5, minus 11 times 1 is 11, minus 2. So we have 1 minus 1 divided by the square root of 4 plus 5, which is 9, minus the square root of 11 minus 2, which is 9. 1 minus 1 over 3 minus 3 will result in the 0 over 0 indeterminate form. We will have to rework this. Since we have a root combination, a root involving the variable x in some way, adding or subtracting with at least one other term that's happening here in the denominator, we can try the root conjugate method. Turns out both terms are roots in the denominator involving x. That's okay too for root conjugate. I'm going to rewrite the original exactly as we see it. And then I'm going to form the root conjugate, which is the same root combination with the opposite sign between the two, which will be a plus. We're going to put it in the numerator and denominator both, so that we have a form of 1, so that when we multiply it by the original, we're not changing the value, we're just changing the look. So our next step is to do the multiplication. That will give us limit as x goes to 1. In the numerator, those are not root conjugates, so I am not going to FOIL those out. We're going to have x minus 1 times the root of 4x squared plus 5x plus the root of 11x minus 2. Keep it factored, don't FOIL it out. In the denominator, those are root conjugates. We are going to FOIL that first. Root of 4x squared plus 5x times the root of 4x squared plus 5x gives us 4x squared plus 5x. The outside, root of 4x squared plus 5x times root of 11x minus 2 will give us a positive root. And since they're both under a root, they can multiply each other under a single root. Inside, negative root of 11x minus 2 times the positive root of 4x squared plus 5x. Overall, that will give us a negative. And then last, we have the negative root of 11x minus 2 times the positive root of 11x minus 2, which is going to give us a negative of 11x minus 2. Make sure to write the 11x minus 2 in parentheses, because that negative is going to distribute, and that's going to be our next step after we cancel out the outside and inside terms, which are equal value opposite sign whenever you do a root conjugate FOIL. The numerator we're going to leave alone, exactly as we see it. And we're going to work with the denominator by distributing the minus sign. So that'll give us a 4x squared plus 5x minus 11x plus 2. So we will have limit as x goes to 1 of x minus 1 times the square root of 4x squared plus 5x plus the square root of 11x minus 2 divided by the 4x squared, doesn't combine with anything. The 5x and the negative 11x will combine to a negative 6x. And then the positive 2 doesn't combine with anything, so plus 2. Now, we've done the root conjugate. This does not remove the 0 over 0, but it turns it into another form. And you work with that form. These are power functions, so we can try the factor cancel. We can see the factor in the numerator that's making the 0. It's right there. We can't see it in the denominator just yet, but that will make a 0, and therefore can factor, and should have an x minus 1 as one of its factors if we go and fully factor it out. So that's what we're going to do next, is factor that denominator. So limit as x goes to 1 of x minus 1 square root of 4x squared plus 5x plus the square root of 11x minus 2 divided by, now the factor, looks like we have a common factor of a 2. I'm going to start with that. It will make the numbers a little bit easier to work with in the actual factorization. So it'd be a good idea maybe to do that. So that will give us limit as x goes to 1 of x minus 1 times the square root of 4x squared plus 5x plus the square root of 11x minus 2 divided by 2 times, and now we'll try the trinomial factoring of what is 2x squared minus 3x plus 1. So since it's 2x squared, we will need a 2x and an x. And a positive 1 is either a positive 1 and a positive 1, or a negative 1 and a negative 1. And since it's negative 3x, it needs to add 2. They need to both be negative. And that does make a negative 2x and a negative 1x for a total of negative 3x. And there's the x minus 1 factors as expected. They can now cancel. That will finally remove the 0 over 0. Indeterminate form, we can rewrite our result. Limit as x goes to 1 of the square root of 4x squared plus 5x plus the square root of 11x minus 2, and all of that divided by 2 times 2x minus 1. If we plug a 1 in now, we should no longer have the 0 over 0 indeterminate form. We will have 4 times 1 squared plus 5 times 1 under a square root plus 11 times 1 minus 2 under a square root over 2 times the quantity of 2 times 1 minus 1. 1 squared is 1 times 4 is 4 plus 5 times 1 is a 5 plus the square root of 11 times 1 is 11 minus 2. In the denominator, 2 times 1 is a 2, so we have 2 minus 1 quantity times 2. Next thing is we'll add the 4 and the 5. That's a 9. We'll subtract 2 from the 11. That's a 9, each under a root. 2 minus 1 is a 2 times that 2. Square root of 9 is a 3. Square root of 9 is a 3. 2 times 1 is a 2. We're getting 6 over 2. Reducing by 2, it's a 3.